Well, the day after May Day, May 2nd, 2015, the Ochelli Effect here on UCY.TV radio. Good evening. It is Saturday. The wonderful day of Saturn. Anyway, have an interesting guest on tonight, and I'm going to bring him in shortly. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, whether you decided to check us out, excuse me, again, further on down the line, or you are catching us live, or catching us on YouTube, or downloading and trading with your friends. I'm very, very grateful for every last one of you. And tonight I do want to say a special thanks to Patricia Boyle-Braunschweiler for your contribution. I do appreciate that. And of course there is a donation button, I should say, for your donation, Patricia. See, I screw up everything. This is what I do. All right. Anyway, Patricia, thank you. Which you can also find that donate button at ucy.tv/TOE, TOE meaning for the Ochelli Effect. Of course, there's a lot of other great stuff on UCY, but I'm going to direct you to my page. Anyway, tonight I got an interesting guy, which, not necessarily do I... Well, you know what? We're going to let this conversation evolve. That's how we're going to do this. This is the first time that I've actually spoken to this gentleman. I've had conversations with him online, sort of, via text, via social media, stuff like that, where we've been involved in the same discussion groups, etc., etc. And he's definitely an interesting character in and of himself, and somebody who covers interesting characters of a historical nature, of a cultural nature. I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm not going to, for those who are in chat, okay, I'm a moderator in there now, so let's try and be civilized, okay? I'm not bothering with my private messages anymore right at the moment, by the way, but I am able to moderate the chat, so there's a side note for no other reason. Anyway, let's see. Oh, what happened? I'm getting a message. Adam Gorightly is his name, by the way, and you can find his stuff at adamgorightly.com. Interesting array. Let's see. No, you're not on. You weren't on yet. Let's see. Actually, now you're on. Okay. I love Skype. It always gives me little trip-ups, you know that? Anyway. As I was saying, Adam Gorightly at adamgorightly.com, also the author of a few books out there, some of which we're going to cover tonight. As I said before, we have been mutually involved in certain forums on social media, and we seem to have similar interests, whereas it regards certain rather interesting and fascinating characters in history and culture, Americana, as it might be described. But we're going to cover a few things about that tonight. And I recently obtained a copy of his latest book on Kerry Thornley, who is a sort of undercovered, interesting guy, even in alternative media, and we're going to get to him, believe me. But first I want to introduce you guys to Adam Gorightly, who I've not actually had a regular, verbal conversation with ever before. So you guys are hearing this for the first time while we're doing this for the first time. How are you tonight, Adam? You're probably muted, Adam.
There we go.
There we go.
I was muted. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Chuck. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, well, both of us are kind of viewed as unusual and almost fringe characters when it comes to making statements about certain historical characters. So I thought this would be just sort of a no-brainer for us to have to meet up on a conversation like this. So,
yeah.
The blind JFK researcher meets Adam Gorightly, you could call this, which is something that nobody thought would happen. But, of course, you were suggested as a guest on one of the forums for my radio show, so I said, yeah, sure, why not? Let's do that. Let me get familiar with Adam a little more. Of course, I've heard about your work for some years now, and, God, you know what? I'm getting way ahead of myself, and I'm not letting the audience in on it. Why don't you try and explain to people just a little bit about who Adam Gorightly is, which is not going to be an easy task, so I know I got to give you a few minutes, but I'd rather you do it yourself than have me ramble on about it for the next 15 minutes.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it kind of brief. Oh boy, how'd I get into writing about weird stuff? You still there, Chuck?
Oh, yeah, I am. I was just muting to
okay.
give you the floor. Sorry.
I heard you go up. So, yeah, I really got into writing about high weirdness and such. It was kind of based on experiences I had when I was younger. I saw some UFOs on LSD, which is another story entirely, but that got me questioning consensus reality. Got interested in the JFK assassination early on. In the early 80s, I was on a Central California junior college campus and saw a poster that asked, did the CIA kill JFK? I went, wow, I never heard of that before. So yeah, after that, got knee deep into looking into the JFK assassination. And so around in the late 80s or so, I got involved in the zine movement, they called it back then. There was listeners aren't familiar with that. It was also called the Zine Revolution. During that period, people started putting out their own self-published zines, they called them, with the proliferation of Xerox technology. It created this forum for people who were into fringe subjects, conspiracies, paranormal, psychedelics,
right.
Punk music.
Yeah, thank God that you're a guy who mentions this, because I bring this up all the time and people think I'm nuts. But there was a time when anything that wasn't being covered in the mainstream, today we have the internet, but anything that wasn't being covered in the mainstream was covered in these underground publications, thusly called zines. Even as a musician, I was a musician and covered in these things as well, and sometimes they were conglomerations of different things. I mean, I was literally in a death metal UFOs magazine once because I was a death metal vocalist. So there was underground zines for that. There was stuff for punk, there was stuff for counterculture, there was stuff for wider political movements. I mean, it really ran the gamut, didn't it?
Oh yeah, it was all over the place. And so when I got exposed to that, eventually I started writing for some of these different zines back in the day. Steam Shovel Press, Paranoia Magazine, a whole list of them. And so eventually, around as the getting into first of all, as we moved into the 90s, internet finally came around, and that kind of killed off the zines into the mid and late 90s. But during that period, the heyday of the zines, that's where all the cutting edge writing was being done, in which eventually provided a lot of fodder for X-Files and on. And so You know, a lot of times obscure material also you could find through those networks back in the day, for the JFK assassination crowd, things like the Torbit document and the Gemstone files, all these different theories about the JFK assassination got passed around. That's how it was done back then. Nowadays you can find a lot of that stuff on the internet.
Right. What they used to call monographs really preceded the zines, because monographs existed in the 60s and 70s as, independently published works that were just kind of sold, for usually almost next to nothing, that somebody else published themselves. Again, with the proliferation of Xerox technology, this is the way this went. And of course, that graduated into these running serials of commentary and analysis by individuals who were, again, way outside of the accepted normal mainstream media at the time. So this was part of the evolution. And yeah, the Torbit document, the Gemstone file, for God's sake, there were guys like Penn Jones had the Continuing Inquiry, which was a running serial of stuff based, about the JFK assassination. At one time, a guy named Gary Mack had a little bit of a zine going, Anyway.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily have to talk about Larry tonight, but anyway, you know what I'm saying.
And so, yeah, conspiracy researchers, for want of a better term, who couldn't find a publisher, they took it upon themselves to just publish these monographs and get them out to the world. And so, yeah, this has evolved over time. So I got involved in that scene, and by the mid-'90s, I was looking into Charles Manson story and different conspiracies related to that. This gathering a bunch of source material, and at one point I figured, hey, I got enough here maybe for a book, and so that was my first book, and probably what I'm best known for, the Shadow over Santa Susana, Black Magic, Mind Control, and the Manson Family Mythos. Along the way, getting involved with the zine culture, I came across this fellow, Kerry Thornley, who wrote for the go-to zine back in the day was called Fact Sheet 5. I don't know if you remember that. And if you wanted to find out about all the different zines out there, you'd go to Fact Sheet 5, because the guy who put that out, Mike Gunderloy, reviewed hundreds of zines. It came out bi-monthly, so whatever your particular area you're interested in, go to Fact Sheet 5, and in Fact Sheet 5 there was a reoccurring column by this character named Kerry Thornley, who was writing about these obscure conspiracies that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I found somewhat befuddling, but there was something compelling about the guy's writing. And he also had his own monograph, self-published thing on the Kennedy assassination, called Dreadlock Recollections, and I got a hold of that. And this is late 80s, early 90s, and once again, I was somewhat befuddled. All the people he was naming in his monograph were people I'd never heard of. And I'd read quite a few books on the Kennedy assassination by then, but anyway, I found something compelling about this character.
Well, before we dig too deep into Kerry Thornley, let's try and, again, sort of address the atmosphere of the time, because I do want to talk to you about Manson a bit, because although you and I have come at it from two entirely different directions, I think you and I actually are landing on about the same conclusion about what really the truth is regarding that. But oddly enough, people like Peter Levin come at certain things from a different angle than I do too, but somehow we end up on the same page occasionally. So I want to start with that. But let's also set the rest of the atmosphere, which is another part of the forgotten sort of networking that used to go on. We had sort of chain letter societies among JFK researchers at that point in time. This is where I started. Also, I was a videotape and audio tape trader. Okay, which was an odd phenomena at the time. But if you put that all together along with, and I remember Fact Sheet 5, and I also remember the Fanzine Bible, which published for about 3 years, early 90s, like right just before the demise of a lot of that stuff, Some of those fanzines, or zines, depending on what you were talking about, graduated into bigger publications, but a lot of them just sort of, died on the vine, or later on became, these blogging spots and things like that now.
Right, exactly.
Which is interesting. But let's again put it into perspective. Now, the Manson thing, let's, do this just for those who are totally uninitiated, because, I mean, there was a point at which, I actually got to talk to Charlie, and it was very, very brief, but it was because I was involved in another sort of underground nexus, which was the release of, sort of unauthorized musical material.
Mm.
So Manson, of course, has been the the subject of unauthorized released musical material over the years. Everything from him with a guitar in the prison hospital, on to his early recordings, which were unearthed. On the West Coast, I think mid '80s they were actually unearthed, but they were distributed in mass in the late '80s. Stuff like this, and even culminating in, I believe it was, I don't know, '95 or '96, when we had the commemoration CD, where you see actually a piece of artwork produced where Manson is actually placed on a U.S. postage stamp
Yep.
and all that. And he's become an interesting sort of subcultural character. Now, a lot of people think that that's just a true crime thing because, they very much adhere to the idea and the mythos, which I love that term, the mythos which is attached to the entire Bugliosi narrative, which was born out of that, co-authored book that he put out called Helter Skelter, right? This is the generally understood mythology, and then, of course, over the years, people have capitalized on it and categorized Manson, in particular ways for their own purposes. People like Geraldo Rivera, Charlie Rose, and all of those, bigger mainstream names have interviewed him and characterized him and sort of pigeonholed him according to that mythos. But when you dig into the reality of it, and one of the most jarring statements I ever got, personally myself, was I got to hear Charles Manson say that he wasn't really that much of a Beatles fan. Which I found extremely funny, considering that this entire thing was supposed to be built on, Manson having listened to the Beatles and having drawn his inspiration for his doomsday cult and his race war ideology and all of that stuff, right? But
Yeah.
what did you find?
Oh God. A lot of stuff. My initial interest, I'd heard all these different quote unquote conspiracy theories that Manson, as far as Manson's relationship to the music industry and the movie industry, and that he was deeply, really embedded and knew a lot of the movers and shakers. And of course, yeah, you mentioned early recordings. He was recorded pretty much early on when he landed in Los Angeles around '67, and that was the first recording that came out, and those were demos. That was the Lie album that came out in 1970. But I heard all of these things, so I wanted to dig a little deeper to find out if there was truth to them. Also, the long-running allegations that the Manson family was part of some military mind control experiment. Mae Brussel was touching on this way back when, and it indeed looks like if he wasn't used in that capacity as a part of a mind control experiment, there's a good reason to believe he was an agent provocateur of some sort.
Well, yeah, and he had some interesting sort of inroads into, first of all, he was in very good proximity to a plethora of artists. People point to the whole association with one of the Beach Boys and all of that, and of course the one producer who was well known, and all of this. But actually, he was in close proximity to a lot of people in a very weird way. But see, that's because there's a misunderstanding of that culture that was going on in that area. People think that, this is a very shocking thing that this, nobody.
It was totally open back then.
But that's the thing, is that, you or I could have walked into that valley there and, probably with just a little bit of, social skills and just seeming like, we were cool with things, could have probably wound up, hanging with the mamas and papas and everything else inside of a day. It wasn't that hard. There was a weird kind of thing going on there. Jimi Hendrix crashing out at the whiskey and stuff like that. This was not, this wasn't the guarded celebrity that we see nowadays who has, entourages and bodyguards and things everywhere they go. This was a totally different culture, right?
All that happened after Tate LaBianca. Then things changed. But yeah, Manson, he was somebody with a modicum of talent. He had some talent there lyrically and as a songwriter, and also he had a gaggle of young women, harem following him around, plus usually was involved in drugs. So that's a good inroad during that period to into the good graces of the different rock stars he rubbed elbows in. Like you mentioned Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys and Neil Young and several others who probably don't want to cop to it these days.
Yeah, who don't actually want to be associated with being at a party with, and et cetera, et cetera. But the truth about the guy is, he did have, he was steeped in criminal activity. That's a reality from his past, and definitely had sort of control over a stable of women. I've heard descriptions about these women that are pretty funny, where it's like, I don't know how high somebody would have to be to want to mess with some of these girls, because they would show up wrecked, But hey, women are women, and when you're drunk enough, that's the way that goes. And of course, you're right. That was what sort of changed the celebrity culture there. But for him to sort of get in with some of these musicians and everything, because he could sort of talk some of the same philosophy. He could play a guitar. He could sing a bit. And actually, wrote a couple of decent songs. People have made fun of stuff like, Dump Truck and Dead Puppies Are No Fun and whatever. But the thing is, some of his songwriting stuff is actually pretty deep. And in reality, some of the views he was espousing were sort of cutting edge, regarding the planet dying and, the ridiculousness of certain things. These are parts of his real philosophy that he sort of gained over the years, along with sort of a tough attitude after being incarcerated so much of his life. This gave him a persona that I don't want to say it's almost like the gangster culture in hip hop, but in a way it gave him a hard life story, kind of real grounded. Ooh, this is a real guy kind of deal. And I think it was part of what provided him with the inroads. Plus, of course, it didn't hurt that he was well connected with people that did deal in decent amounts of drugs.
Yeah,
and that always helps.
Yeah, he had that street cred for sure, and learned a lot in prison that prepared him for that. There's the stories about how he was exposed to Scientology, and he was studying psychology, and there's conflicting things. Was Charlie illiterate? How did he learn all of this stuff? But he definitely had a good working knowledge, and was aware by the time he hit the streets in '67 of how Eastern mysticism was emerging. So he steeped himself in that and could talk the lingo and play a little guitar. And also, when he landed in the Haight-Ashbury, he's a little bit older. He was like 34, so the young kids that came under his wing, they're pretty easy picking. Here, this was an experienced con who'd been around the block a few times.
Right.
Knew how to manipulate people.
Yeah, absolutely, and that all plays into what really developed. So some of the mythos is real. But when they start to get into this whole concept about how he thought he was going to light off the world by slaughtering Sharon Tate, and and all the residents that happened to be at that house, and maybe it was a mistake because he thought it was still the record producer's joint, and then of course the grocery store owners, the LaBiancos, which are a whole story in and of themselves. When you really dig into this stuff, there's actually tons of other motives that don't have to do with, all of this other stuff. And there's possibilities of other people being involved that have nothing to do with the typical helter-skelter, and I hold up the air quotes, helter-skelter, mythology. And it doesn't. I'm sorry, it just doesn't ring true to me, and I'm especially with Bugliosi being one of the main proponents of this thing. I'm sorry, but over the years, I have no respect for this guy. I see him as as an opportunist who may not even be guilty of doing the work that I do despise so badly, but also an extremely arrogant and extremely judgmental human being, also, who had no problem very cruelly sort of handling the situation. Now, again, I'm not trying to say that Charlie Manson is an innocent guy, probably guilty of a million criminal offenses, but the framing of it and the sort of use of the fear tactics that this had to do with, this really did create a marked change, not only in the celebrity culture of the West Coast, but kind of in American culture as well. And to me, he's one of the first real true anti-heroes in American history.
True, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's the Bugliosi indeed put a spin upon it. Don't forget that he was the DA prosecuting these Manson and his bunch, and a lot of people once again have pointed to the connections with Hollywood, and Bugliosi basically wanted to drop a veil of silence over Manson's connections with the Hollywood elite and steer it all towards the whole helter-skelter thing, that he was nuts, influenced by listening to the Beatles, on and on. All of this was going to bring about a race war. You know the story.
Yeah.
And with Bugliosi, you look at, I mean, Mae Brussel, once again, if bring up her name, she suggested that Bugliosi was one of that group that were she called them the power control group that co-opted the story and spun it in the way that most served the powers that be. And you can see what Vince has been involved with since Helter Skelter, his Helter Skelter book, involved in looking into the RFK assassination, as well as his book on JFK assassination.
Yeah, in addition to, and I want to support him when he talks about, trying to prosecute W. I really do, right? But my problem is that, this guy, from on high is telling us about exactly what the nature of God is. In one book, he's telling us exactly how everybody's a screwball who thinks it's anybody but Oswald, who pulled the trigger on November 22nd, 1963. And I mean, really, in a most egregious manner, attacks individuals in that book, and that's, of course, that reclaiming history doorstop piece of garbage that thankfully failed, and I make no apologies for my views on Vinny. Let me tell you, and I've taken flack for that. I really don't care. I mean, listen, he owes me a lot of time of my life, because I sat through that damn 2,000 pages, and also went through the CD-ROM just to see if there was anything valid in there, And yeah, you owe me that plus the discount amount of money, Mr. Bugliosi. I'll accept that check anytime for that month of my life I had to spend on your tome. So anytime you want to pass me that check, I'll stop talking about you. But anyway, moving on. The thing is that, of course, he had a co-author with Helter Skelter. He also got, monetary gain from the book deal and everything else, putting himself up as a paragon of virtue. There's a whole lot of, agreements now, silencing of other individuals based on Bugliosi, and I don't really care that he's a lawyer. It's part of the public record that he was basically a bully, from every office he tried to hold. Then he tried to get himself elected to higher office and couldn't do it because basically people knew that he was pretty despicable, and still this guy emerges as a darling of mainstream publishing. And sorry, none of these views are Adam Gorightly's. I just want everybody to know that. This is my viewpoint, and I'm speaking for myself. Sorry, but
well, yeah, hey,
he angers me.
if he sells books, of course he's going to be the darling. It's the bottom line.
Yeah, but even when he doesn't, and you also know that the manipulation of that stuff also went on. I mean, Helter Skelter was a popular book, but I mean, when you look at Reclaiming History, the pre-orders are what made it a bestseller.
Yeah.
And then after that, I mean, and I even have told this story on the air that I wound up buying 5 of his books for like $2 and change a pop in order so that I could throw 4 of them in a dumpster and take one home. Okay, I did that, and I make no apologies about that. But I mean, when you see a book being discounted like that during the same 2-year period from its release, you know what that means. So
I can't say I wasted any money on it.
well, like I said, he can include that $2.58 or whatever it was in that check. I'm willing to accept that, Vince. Okay, sorry, I got to do that. But back to it. What is the reality that you come to, though, regarding this guy? I mean, Mae Brussell was interesting, and I loved Mae, believe me. But I don't think that Bugliosi was one of the power elites, per se. It's just that he was in a good spot. He was in the right place at the right time, and he is an opportunist. And, of course, you got to be somewhat of a leech to be a successful lawyer in that time period for certain, if not nowadays, too. But the thing is, he was relatively successful but couldn't ascend any higher, and then, of course, retreated into publishing, where, again, because of the success of Helter Skelter, became extremely popular, I believe, and ever after has essentially lived on that. But, okay, enough of Bugliosi. What did you come to regarding Manson? I mean, did you actually talk to some of the followers, the ones that came after, Charlie was in prison already? Because I did some of that. Personally, myself.
Yeah, a few of the more obscure ones, but the original focus of the book was just to look at everything out there, pull it together, kind of sort through it, and 600 pages later, my God, it created this monster. As far as I don't agree with Mae Brussels' final analysis. I think it, and you mentioned the drug dealing that was going on. The first Manson murder, the first official one, was the murder of Gary Hinman by Bobby Beausoleil, and that was all wrapped around a drug deal that went sour. And as you look into the other murders, with Tate, the Tate house murders, there was drug dealing going on there, with Wojtek Frykowski.
I was just going to say Frykowski, Sebring, all these guys. Sebring with the coke, Frykowski with coke and marijuana, apparently, and these were leads that were never even followed up on. It seemed to me like he just wanted to tie it together into this really, sensational package, and that's what he did successfully. But
even the La Biancas, I mean, none of this has been totally confirmed, but that there was some drug associations there, and there was connections with La Bianca to the mafia, and on and on and on. And so, what some have pointed to, that Manson and his bunch were basically working as hitmen, take out some drug dealers.
Which would make a lot more sense. It's a whole lot more of a plausible, grounded sort of motive for what went on. Okay?
Not to say there wasn't some innocent victims in all of this as well.
Oh, no. Listen, there's collateral damage all over the place, and I don't even, like you say, there's allegations about the La Biancas.
Yeah.
There's some odd movement of money. There's actually a possibility of a gambling connection. Maybe there was some debt there. There's all sorts, but here's the problem: none of those leads were followed up on.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was funny, and there's all kinds of these odd connections. The deeper you get into it, with hair salons and people who sold wigs. Of course, Sebring, he became famous for his hair salon, and the movie. What was the thing with Warren Beatty? Shampoo was based on Sebring, so there was the wig hair salon connection there, which what's her name, Rosemary LaBianca was also involved in selling wigs, and none other than Tex Watson for a period of time in like 67, 68 or so ran a hair salon where they sold wigs, and some suspect that that was kind of the connection, one of the connections between these folks.
Well, right there's actually a whole thing about that. Sebring was actually, the hairstylist to the stars
Hmm.
at that point. Not something that you think of as a big deal right now. He's just on a victim list anymore in the Helter Skelter tale, but he
Oh yeah.
was actually a relatively important figure when it came to business, and a lot of business that was done in Los Angeles and in that area at the time was connected to, as we said before, drug culture permeated everything. So it's no shock that people that were dealing in higher class kind of financial, arenas were also going to be tied to some of these other guys because, look, even whether you're rich or poor, you're still going to need a guy to go get your coke. You're not going to have a coca plant in your backyard, okay? This is the way this goes.
Oh yeah.
And
Nice clean way to pick up your drugs. Go get your hair styled, and
yep,
score what you need.
there you go. And even with the open culture, which again I do blame a lot on the need for the dealing of the illicit drugs, but also, I mean, there was also sort of a market social change that was going on too, and of course, you could be easily pilloried for being too much of a rock star at that point in time, right? When it came to musicians and things. So all of this plays into it, and it's all forgotten because we can wrap it around this giant race war myth.
Hmm.
And I know I'm laughing at that, but you know, why do you think? I mean, forget about my viewpoints. Why do you think, though, that was the thing that they seized upon, and where do you think that really came from?
Well, there might have been some truth to it, you know. Manson would get on a lot of philosophical raps about what was going on in the world and what was coming down, you know. So Manson said a lot of crazy things over the years, and you can cherry pick, and somebody cherry picked the whole helter skelter theory.
Yeah, well, he could have cherry picked it out of a million things. I mean, this guy
Hmm.
would wind up taking some mushrooms and talking by the campfire all night from all
Exactly,
accounts. You
exactly.
know,
Yeah. So
and
you
hey,
get.
listen, if you or I wound up, taking enough mushrooms and sitting by a campfire, we could probably talk about the nature of God and really mean that we just met him.
I
Depending
mean,
on the amount of
and
mushrooms we took.
and when you have evidence on the scene like helter skelter scrawled in blood on a door, okay, let's tie it into the Beatles album. Yeah, interview people. Yeah, Manson listened to the Beatles and he was pointing out certain songs, and if you head down a certain road looking for certain answers in a certain direction, well, you'll turn them up.
Yeah, and pigs at the other site and
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
else. Yeah.
Tie that into the George Harrison song, sure.
You got it. You got it. Well, I don't want to spend the whole time on Manson, but I wanted to touch on that with you because I'm in the minority out there about this. I know, but I realistically believe that although Manson, being a guy who was only convicted of conspiracy, wound up being sentenced to death, he still sits there, right? You know, I think he was convicted in the public's mind for the wrong reason. If we're gonna lock somebody up, at least let's get the story straight. You
he
know what I
was
mean?
he was just a patsy.
At the end of it all, yeah, probably in the larger scheme of things, and isn't that strange that again, another nobody that seemed to have some remarkable and weird connections to well-known people winds up in that position. Now, let's shift gears a bit if you don't mind, because I do want to cover Kerry Thornley for the most part. But I definitely wanted to address that, unless there's something else that you think we need to add to that discussion.
Oh no, I've been talking about Manson for years and years. I've been trying to escape the subject.
Well, I'm sorry about that,
Oh
but
no,
man,
no, no, that's cool.
one of the first books I ever read through, to completion was Helter Skelter, right? And then it was only a couple of years later, I think, I picked up a book called The Family, and then continued on through that nexus of stuff. And like I said, even wound up, meeting with individuals that, portrayed themselves to me as devotees of Charles Manson, years and years after he had already been in prison. You know.
Yeah.
So I found just that psychology interesting to begin with, and that's what sucked me into it personally.
Hmm.
And then
Oh,
when I
yeah. Yeah, likewise, for sure. I went down the same rabbit hole. It all started with the made-for-TV movie in 1975. That got me going, and of course, you start reading all the books, and there you go.
Yeah, right. And unfortunately, I think I'm a little younger than you, Adam, but
Yep.
because I was born in '72, so I was learning to read in '75, but Daddy gave me newspapers instead of Helter Skelter. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but not too long after that, I'm telling you, I was a young kid walking around with a beat up paperback of Helter Skelter, and people were like, "Oh, like thought that there was something wrong with me for even reading it."
Yeah.
But it did. I'll give Bugliosi credit here. He did get me interested in the subject and begin understanding what it's like to dissect the media versus the reality.
Hmm.
So I'll give him that. All right. So Kerry Thornley. Now this guy is known in JFK assassination research circles. Okay, absolutely, and is seen as everything from a BS artist to an integral part of the conspiracy. Okay, and that you would have to confess that that is absolutely true among various individuals who are concerned with this kind of work and research, right?
Indeed, yeah.
So here's the thing. What would you do for somebody who's never heard of Kerry Thornley at all before? How would you begin to explain this man? I mean, you started to when, during the introduction here, and I kind of cut you off, but I want to give you a chance to really, if nobody's ever heard of Kerry Thornley before, what would you explain about him?
Yeah, I mentioned how I came across his work back in the zine days, and so, yeah, he interested me. And in 91, a book came out called Conspiracies, Cover-Ups, and Crimes by an author named Jonathan Vankin. And it was, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it
I
was,
had that one too, yeah.
yeah. So several different chapters in that book about different conspiracies. And the first chapter is dedicated to none other than Kerry Thornley. And so I got into that a little deeper, read that chapter, and it said how Thornley was involved as a youth, co-founding a spoof religion called Discordianism, and later he went into the Marines where he met Oswald and ended up writing a book based on Oswald, a fictional account, 3 years before the Kennedy assassination. And it also said in the book, or in Vankin's book, that Thornley claimed he was an MK Ultra victim and also a Nazi genetic breeding experiment. All of this stuff just blew my mind. I went, wow, pretty crazy story. And
Mm.
Vankin noted in that chapter that he was considering writing a biography of Kerry Thornley, and so eagerly I was waiting with anticipation for that biography to come out. It never did. In the ensuing years, I was gathering more material on Thornley, corresponded with him, and at some point I finally decided, well, if Vankin's not going to write the book, then I will. And that was the first book about Thornley that came out in 2003 called The Prankster and the Conspiracy. The story of Kerry Thornley, how he knew Oswald and inspired the counterculture.
This is where I first heard of you. So
Mm-hmm.
this is where I first heard of you, and to be honest with you, when I heard certain interviews with you, a couple of years later, because you do know that researchers will turn around and pass around the interviews of others to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I wound up with some tapes of you talking about this, but they weren't the complete interviews; they were just like excerpts. And
Yeah.
I thought, honestly, this was my first impression of you, that you were just making fun of the rest of us with what you were saying, because based on the excerpts, it sounded like you weren't taking it very seriously, like you were willing to tie it to everything in the world to sort of, say to us, listen, you see how ridiculous this is? But I later learned that wasn't your purpose. And the reason is they labeled these interviews as, it was like labeled on tapes and things, saying that, this is not a serious thing. It was kind of strange. But this was never a joke to you, was it?
No, in different interviews I do, I try to approach it, everything I do, with the perspective of throwing some humor in there now and then when appropriate. But yeah, as far as Kerry Thornley, it's just a crazy, wild ride and I've tried throughout the whole thing to present the facts of the case and also, speculation related to it.
Well, right. What I see through your work is this: that you provide his story, okay, from his own words. You provide some speculations of your own and some realistic evidence, all at the same time. Now that's a hell of a balancing act to pull off,
Mm-hmm.
because look, my own perception of Thornley is just like my perception of a lot of these guys who are involved in some very strange underground situations. Okay, which is that you got to take everything they say with a grain of salt. Okay, because some of what they're going to tell you is so real it's mind blowing, but some of what they're going to tell you, not sure where it comes from. You know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
and that's my honest opinion. And I'm not saying this to you to be confrontational or nasty to you. I'm saying to you that that's been my perception of Thornley all along. And I'm not as well studied on him as you are. In fact, I'll admit that he is probably one of the interesting figures that I didn't take as much time to study as I probably should have. I wasted my time on people like Gordon Novell, okay, and things like this, who is, in my estimation, a big waste of time. But
Yeah, I agree. And well, there hasn't been that much in-depth research on Thornley, really, besides my books.
besides what you've done, I was just going to
Yeah,
say you're the guy for that. That's for
and
sure. Mhm.
one thing you talk about, what can you believe about anything he says, because he comes up with some wild statements over the years, but you kind of need to look at Thornley in two parts.
Okay.
One, from everything he wrote and interviews he did, probably up to 72 or 73, going through that whole Warren Commission, Garrison investigation period. Then after that, and this is according to a lot of his friends I talked to, who include a clinical psychologist, that he went off the deep end for a period of years, was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, and that's kind of the period where he made some of his more outlandish claims, where he started remembering things.
Well, and that is part of the argument there, is that during that time period, right, this guy could have either been emerging from a fog he was in and having to cope with it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
thusly, you still have to sort through his statements
Yeah.
because he was affected. That's a kind of a certainty in my mind that there was something wrong with him for a while. And therefore some of those statements you have to extract, the pearls from the mess, and that might be just all honesty. But also these guys who wind up in these nexuses, okay, also end up, I don't know how to put this, but end up building taller tales sometimes.
There you go. Yeah.
And I don't know if it's the influence of the fact that they become persons of interest when they were so much in the shadows before, or if it is as a result of an MK Ultra situation. I mean, if you think about it, to say that you're basically a genetic Nazi experiment, and you're a MK Ultra victim, and you were involved in the JFK assassination, it sounds like a really extremely far-flung, way too much to pull together sort of narrative, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a lot of places you got to be. You got to be a seriously pivotal individual to be of interest to that many people that are involved in so many different industries. That it's almost amazing. It's almost beyond belief at all. But then again, truth is often stranger than fiction. So it's one of those things where, like I said, it's hard to sort through. So, of course, he went through that time period. But then after, how do you think he emerged from that?
he emerged very well, actually. It appears that he went on medication. You can listen to it. I have a lot of letters when he was really went down into a dark place and exhibited classic paranoia, schizophrenic stuff where he was writing how everybody became involved in the conspiracy, including his friends and family, everybody under the sun. He suspected everybody, which is classic paranoia. But the question is, what caused the craziness at the core of it all? I think most likely, or there's a good chance there was something to Thornley being manipulated, handled, perhaps associated one way or another. But going through the 60s, and he took his fair share of acid, and later coming under the lens of Garrison and the stress of all of that. By the time the early 70s came around, it really done a number on his head.
Well, and let's just say this. I mean, being in close proximity to that situation, also having come through that, and then having had, some sort of and I hate to even, use terms like this, but having some sort of breakdown, it's very possible that what we're looking at is somebody who was really victimized, by an MK Ultra kind of thing. Some of the more outlandish statements he's making might not be really truly his own, But where is it that you wind up sorting through this? Because you've taken a lot of time and a lot of effort to sort through that. How do you come through all of that? And I mean, could you describe for people how it is you can begin to sort this out?
Well, a good way to sort it out is to tell the story. I don't know if we have time to get into all the details, but when Thornley first met Oswald.
We've got another hour if you want it. No problem.
Perhaps give a thumbnail sketch of Thornley's associations with Oswald and some of the things that happened in New Orleans. So, Thornley met Oswald at El Toro Marine Base in 58. Oswald had just come back from Atsugi, Japan, where he had served as a radar technician. A lot of people suggest, and it makes a lot of sense from the documentation I've seen over the years, that he became a spy at that time. And so he comes back over to the States, to El Toro, and he has this cloud hanging over him like a screw up,
Just for the listener's sake, the whole adventure with Oswald at Atsugi ties him directly to the U-2, which of course was a large, CIA-based project, also integrated into the military. Of course, Oswald, being a Marine at the time, was returned, stateside to El Toro after his time at Atsugi, where there is no question that he was involved in some sort of intelligence work, regardless of how you come down on it or how major or minor you think his role was. So that's the preface to the meeting with Thornley. I just wanted to make sure that was real clear to the listeners. Sorry, Adam. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So, he met Oswald during that period, and they engaged in conversations. And I suspect one of my theories here is that Oswald was working for the brass at this point and gathering info on potential security risks, one of whom was Thornley probably put out a red flag because he was a self-avowed atheist and willing to entertain discussions about Marxist ideology and on and on. And so they knew each other for a period of roughly 2 months. And so then Thornley gets shipped over to Atsugi, where Oswald had previously been stationed. On his way over, Thornley is working on a book called The Idle Warriors about being a soldier during the Cold War period. And the main character he was basing on different Marines he knew, including himself, Oswald, and several others, this character, Johnny Shelburne. So Thornley gets over to Atsugi Air Base, and that's around the period of time that Oswald defected. And Thornley went, oh, wow, there's a great plot twist there. And at that time, he decided to base the main character on his in his book primarily on Oswald. So that's the
Right. All
first.
of this is real easily provable and absolutely something that you can substantiate easily. That this is the stuff that Thornley was involved in. And that was a composite character, but there's a lot of weird parallels to the real life Lee Harvey Oswald in that character, though, isn't there?
Oh, indeed. No, he did pretty much, base it on Oswald afterwards, uh, particularly after the assassination, if you could say. I was writing this fiction novel based on Oswald before the Kennedy assassination. There was a selling point, and he was hoping to tap into that. And that's one of the reasons he appeared before the Warren Commission. In Thornley's own words, that he was trying to use that opportunity to promote his book in the works, The Idle Warriors. And of course, Thornley was one of the only ones who spoke before the Warren Commission that Oswald had an interest in Marxism. And of course, this would later come up on Garrison's radar and Harold Weisberg, that Thornley was writing these books and testifying before the Warren Commission to basically set up Oswald after the fact as a lone nut commie sympathizer. But let's not go there quite yet. You mentioned so Otsugi Air Base, where both Thornley and Oswald were stationed, was one of the largest CIA installations during that period, and that's where they launched the U-2 out of. Then the U-2, Gary Powers was flying when he got shot down over Soviet territory, and later blamed it on Oswald. And also, it's where the MK Ultra program was going down, according to an expose in Rolling Stone during the mid '80s. And this is also touched upon other books by A.J. Weberman, Coup d'etat in America. That this was the largest storehouse of LSD in Otsugi, and also in Manila in the Philippines is where they had the CIA had their other storehouse for acid under the auspices of MK Ultra. Interestingly enough, Thornley served at both those bases. Mm-hmm. And another connection that comes into this is that E. Howard Hunt was also stationed at Otsugi for a period of time concurrent with Oswald and Thornley. Thornley later grew to suspect that he had been manipulated by E. Howard Hunt in disguise in New Orleans in the early 60s, during that same time period where Jim Garrison claimed that Thornley met with Oswald in September of 63 prior to the Kennedy assassination. So it gets pretty darn convoluted, and I can't blame people who heard me being interviewed in years past. It's like, this is too many odd connections to, to believe all of this.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that there are substantial connections to points of interest that Thornley has that are, verifiable. Then you get off into these other things, like the whole meeting with Hunt thing in New Orleans, right, becomes a problem. Mm-hmm. Because what you have is his word, and I don't think very much else to go on.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you, but it's pretty curious, that Thornley had picked up on the the E. Howard Hunt connection. But the story there was, Thornley got out of the Marines, and in 61 moved to New Orleans with his friend Greg Hill. And so Thornley, the budding writer, wanted to meet colorful people, and he certainly had a lot in New Orleans during that period, not only the bohemians and artists and whatnot, but also people claiming they were involved with the mob one way or another, or had intelligence connections, and which were the MO of a couple of people he met named Gary Kirsten and Slim Brooks. And he engaged them in conversations, and one of them was kind of a morbid intellectual exercise, a theoretical discussion of how to kill a president, and in particular, JFK. Mm-hmm. Once again, Thornley didn't think much of those conversations at the time, but later they would come back to haunt him.
Well,
Insert the creepy organ music there.
right, yeah, exactly. And
And oh,
here's the weird thing about
let,
that, though.
let, let,
Go
let me
ahead.
let me follow it up with so it was a decade later when he came across that book by A.J. Weberman, which I'm sure you're familiar with. A.J. Weberman and Michael Canfield, Coup d'etat in America,
Right.
the acronym for CIA, that showed, the three tramps in Dealey Plaza, and he had the photo acetate overlays where you could match up the old man tramp with the E. Howard Hunt. Photos of Hunt had just, come out during that period with Watergate. Anyway, Thornley came across this material and went, "Oh crap! I think that's the same guy I met in New Orleans in the early '60s," and that's when those floodgate of memories opened up to him of other connections and associations he had during that period.
Well, yeah, and that's an interesting book by Weberman and Canfield. But honestly, I feel as though the whole Hunt and Dealey Plaza thing has sort of fallen apart over the years.
I
And
agree. I agree with you.
and regardless of what it might have triggered, I mean, that guy does. If you take a look at it, and you don't do, your basic sort of, a forensic anthropologic, studies on it, you'll find that looks pretty reasonable. That could be the same guy and everything else. But of course,
Yeah.
we've learned over the years a lot of things about this, and even if you go through the Dallas Police archives, you can actually find out certain things about this.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll leave that.
I'm with you. Yeah.
We'll leave that aside. But the interesting thing, of course, and what I was going to, I'm sorry if I'm rudely interrupting you now and then, but the thing is, I like to make sure that we're laying this out for the listeners, in the best way possible. The idea about New Orleans, being what it was really an interesting and kind of unique place, because you did have these like intellectuals, pseudo-intellectuals, sort of congregating there. There was a really bizarre sort of underworld nightlife that went on there. All kinds of stuff from, different types of organized hustles between tavern owners, loading drinks, like everything from as simple as loading drinks, and this is documentable, where these bar owners would basically, have women in their bars that were meant to get guys drunk. Meanwhile, the woman's drinking water, and buying drinks for the woman, and they would cut up, divvy up the spoils afterwards, this kind of stuff. People were getting rolled for all sorts of interesting things. There was a burgeoning sort of underground, a whole bunch of burgeoning underground sex rings. There were religious orders going on there that were part of the underground. All of this stuff sort of at a crossroads in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Right? And on top of it, the criminal elements that we're talking about, like legit, straight up, mobsters of many stripes, okay, some serious businessmen, right, all in proximity to one another, a really diverse potpourri of underground individuals and people that really were not looking forward to getting the spotlight shown on them for their activities, all sort of congregating in this one city. So isn't that an interesting place to be, to begin with, and actually probably an extremely fruitful and fertile place for a writer to be, right? So Thornley being there makes perfect sense, but also there was intelligence assets and things like that. I mean, there was gun running going on. There was all sorts of wild stuff, right?
Yeah, and as far as the Hunt thing, whether Thornley actually met with Hunt or not, I don't know for sure. Obviously, I'm not leaning in either direction, but Hunt was through there, it seemed like, and there was that the anti-Castro Cuban contingent there that was later connected to the Bay of Pigs. So yeah, you had all of that weirdness going on. You talk about different obscure religions and things going on. I think a lot of the time it was just people getting different credentials through the mail and labeling themselves affiliated with different organizations. But the Thornley and Greg Hill's spoof religion Discordianism kind of got established there in New Orleans during that period, and this was something else when Garrison and Harold Weisberg and other people came across and started wondering what's this weird religion dedicated to the Greek goddess of chaos and Discordianism that Thornley was involved with. Was this some type of CIA front organization? And of course, when Thornley later went off the deep end, he began to suspect this himself.
Well, right, but again, like we said, I mean, there was sort of this, really dark and really layered sort of society that was there, in New Orleans at the time. So,
Mm-hmm.
and realistically, it could have been. This could have very much been a controlled experiment because I bet you a
Yeah.
lot of those things went on in New Orleans. But it's hard to really put your finger on it because there's just so much really going on there.
Well,
you know.
you bring up somebody like Gordon Novell.
Oh yeah.
Uh, that was a case. Thornley ended up having all these connections, with people that Garrison said was involved one way or another, and I don't think there was anything direct during the period Novell and Thornley were in New Orleans, but Thornley later discovered that he and Novell had both attended the University of Southern California at the same time. And in fact, Thornley knew him back then as Gordy, but yeah, a lot of the mythology that comes out of this, it seems sometimes it's spun by the players themselves. I doubt that Novell was ever involved with the CIA, but Novell claimed he was, so those rumors spread, and of course the CIA denied it, but people can say, of course the CIA are going to deny it, and yeah,
Well, right.
colorful character there, who we later find out over the years was involved in all kinds of stuff from the O.J. Simpson case to the last thing before he died. He was involved in back engineering extraterrestrial technology, so you can
Yeah.
take that for what it's worth.
Everything from that to electronic surveillance, actually a possible
Mm-hmm.
connection to Watergate.
Yeah.
Novell is all over the place, bugging Jim Garrison's office at one point. I think he was involved in. I believe that. you know.
Well, yeah, if you, I mean, originally he was called in there because he was some type of electronics expert. I mean, there's different stories, and Garrison brought him in because Garrison thought his offices were being bugged, and Novell, being the opportunist, he he probably set up wiretaps and was getting whatever information he could to. He's just an opportunist.
Yeah, he would have sold it to, if Hoover wanted to pay him to be an informant, I think he would have sold it to him. If Helms wanted it, he would have sold it
Yeah.
to him. Phillips, anybody would have came along, I think he would have sold it to him. That's pretty much what he was about. He was just one of these guys who was like a surveillance guy in the age before really good electronics came out.
And always a promoter. He was involved in New Orleans promoting different events, So yeah, he was a player.
Oh yeah, always keeping. But you see, that to me seemed more like secondary to what he really loved to do, which was to basically be involved in sort of blackmail on one level or another, and profiteering from it, and really again to the highest bidder. I've heard accounts of him, possibly, doing work for organized crime figures, doing work for the FBI, and all of these things, again, stranger than fiction, seem to actually have happened. Now, Novell gets involved in some things where he doesn't belong. Like, I think if Garrison could have had him returned, with that warrant, I think that, as a material witness, he wouldn't have gotten very far with him. I don't think he really had much knowledge about anything outside of, the bugging operation of his office. But hey, this is my opinion again. Uh, but just a good example of another fascinating character. That's why I brought him up.
Hey, the greatest rumor going around over the years was that it was Novell who stuck a needle on Mae Brussels' seat that she sat on and got the fast-acting cancer that ultimately killed her. And who knows? Maybe Novell started that rumor himself. Who knows?
Well, yeah, I mean, and this guy again, and of course, not, far beyond New Orleans, was still a self promoter. He was also the guy who claimed that he had literally laid eyes on, the compromising photographs of J. Edgar Hoover, and all this other stuff. And I'm not convinced. Okay,
Hmm.
I'm not going to say it's not possible. I'm going to say I'm not
Yeah.
convinced that this is the reality. And but back to Thornley, because again, okay, he does go off the rails for a while, but he's got some very plausible connections to a lot of stuff, including Oswald. Interesting that he's even aware of Oswald's defection. At the time he's stationed at Atsugi, right? And of course, Oswald is working in the radio factory when Power's plane goes down in the Soviet Union, and all that, which is still an arguable thing that happens. I think that the real source for Powers blaming Oswald, it comes from his son nowadays, right? From Power's son, confirming that, I guess. But the odd thing to me is that people that I've spoken to that were in the Soviet Union at the time and in close proximity to Oswald all say that pretty much he was scared that this was going to bring like a lot of heat on him as the American, sitting there in Minsk. you know,
Yeah.
I don't think he was providing the information as a radar operator that would have helped them to bring down the U-2.
No, I think
Excuse me.
Gary Powers just might have made that assumption, knowing that Oswald was over there and he got shot down during the same time period.
Yeah, I think that might have been an assumption, but again, it's see, here's the problem with a lot of this stuff, right? Especially when you're dealing with somewhat peripheral and occasionally focus points for intelligence operations, right? Is that, like I said before, a lot of tales are spun out of things, and Thornley has been a victim of this too, where yeah, he spun some of these things himself. I wanted to make that clear first, but also he's been mischaracterized too, hasn't he?
Yeah, and that was the kind of the take with my book was to present a certain portion of it in his words, explaining what went down at what one time or another with all these different associations. Also, the book features some of his writings over the years on the JFK assassination. But yeah, I wanted to give Thornley a little equal time.
Right.
Because he hasn't, I don't think he's gotten that, at least not until recently.
No, and in my estimation, you're the only author who's actually done some work on it. Outside of adding them to a chapter in a book, like you were talking about before, this kind of thing, or some mentions. Some people try and seize upon some of his statements to verify their own stuff,
Yeah,
but at the same time dismiss a whole lot of what else he's saying. You know,
yeah. You got to look at the whole whole bundle, the big picture, all of his actions and every different comments he made over the years, and that's what I try to do to make sense of all of this craziness.
Oh yeah, you're painting a full picture, and you're also in a recent issue of Paranoia magazine too, which is one of those zines that graduated into a larger publication and is now has an internet presence and all that. Paranoia magazine, you can find Adam in there too. But also, if you just go to Amazon and just, there's not too many guys named Adam Gorightly, and yes, put Go and Rightly as one word, and Adam Gorightly is something that you can find all around. Plus, you can just go to adamgorightly.com and take a look at a wide array of stuff that you've done too. I just wanted to make sure I got that in as we're going into this a little further. But this book on Thornley is the most recent work of yours, right?
Yeah, I had two books come out in 2014, and in May of 2014, Historia Discordia, Origins of the Discordian Society was published, and then later last year, 2014, was Caught in the Crossfire, Kerry Thornley, Lee Oswald, and the Garrison Investigation. And a lot of this material, I mentioned the previous book, Historia Discordia, came from the Discordian archives, which were passed on to me a few years back, and is related to Thornley, obviously, his connection with Discordianism. And it was in those files that I found additional materials related to Thornley and the Kennedy assassination, which is the reason I wrote the second book on Thornley, because there was more just more information about the Thornley and the Garrison investigation that I came across over the years since writing that first book, The Prankster and the Conspiracy, back in 2003.
How widespread did Discordianism get to be? That's a question that's being passed to me on the Skype. How big of a group was this? Was this like a large cult that was just based on a joke? Is actually the question. Which, if you read the book, you understand it a little better. But
yeah.
But I wonder if you wouldn't mind, giving people an idea about that.
Let's present it as a spoof religion that they kind of came up with to poke fun at organized religion and kind of comment on society, and also play pranks and this type of stuff. Not unsimilar to something like the Church of Subgenius, but how big was it? It just started really as an in-joke between Kerry Thornley and his buddy Greg Hill in a bowling alley in Southern California in 1958, where they claimed they had a vision of the goddess Eris, and over the years they came up with their own religious text, the Principia Discordia, which, oddly enough, according to legend, the first edition, made up of 5 copies, was printed on Jim Garrison's copying machine a couple of years before the Garrison investigation. Once again, another one of those odd connections. The person who did this for Thornley and Greg Hill was a typist in Garrison's office by the name of Lane Kaplinger, who also happens to be the sister of Grace Kaplinger, who nowadays goes by the name of Grace Zabriskie. She's a pretty famous actress. She played Laura Palmer's mother in Twin Peaks, and she was good friends with Thornley. I'm getting sidetracked here, but so they started this as an in-joke, but they got other writers and artists involved, such as, one of them was Barbara Reed, who later became the key witness against Kerry Thornley and kind of an unofficial member of Garrison's staff. Other people who were involved back in the 60s were Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea, who later came out with the Illuminatus trilogy. And in the Illuminatus trilogy, it talked about Discordianism plays a big part in that book, and the Bible of Discordian, Principia Discordia. And a lot of people, when I read it the first time, I thought, oh, this is just a bunch of made-up stuff. But the first book in the Illuminatus was dedicated to Kerry Thornley and Greg Hill, so they were a huge influence on the Illuminatus trilogy, which became pretty big in the counterculture. So over the years, kind of Discordianism grew. It was a subculture that was involved in these humorous writings and different pranks and whatnot. And where it gets kind of strange is during the Garrison investigation, you had, if you're familiar with the term, the Daily Plaza Irregulars, different investigators who showed up passing on different information to Garrison, information that was a bit sketchy at times, and one of these was a guy named Alan Chapman, who had affiliations with the John Birch Society. And I think Chapman was the one who came up with the theory of one of the shooters being in that manhole, but Chapman also suggested that the Bavarian Illuminati was wrapped up in the JFK assassination, and when Thornley heard this, he thought it was hilarious, and so they came up with their own Bavarian Illuminati letterhead and started sending prank letters to not only Garrison, but the John Birch Society. And so those were some of the early antics of the Discordians. Over the years, the thing has just kind of grown, and there's no rules with Discordianism. Anybody can be a pope, and you can be of any political ideology, or you don't have to. And the saying goes, we Discordians must stick apart, but it's something that caught on partly through the association with Robert Anton Wilson. And now if you go on the web, search for Discordianism, the Discordian Society, you'll find all kinds of people involved in this worldwide on Facebook, etc., etc. Some of it's juvenile, stupid stuff, but anyway, it's evolved over time, and once you let Eris, the Greek goddess of chaos, out of the bottle, there's no getting her back in. Thornley, when he went through those crazy years, he mused to himself at one time he wished he'd worshipped Venus instead of Eris, because it had evidently brought so much chaos into his life over the years.
Well, yeah, and it's an interesting concept for certain, and it is kind of funny, and even odder. And when you talk about the Dealey Plaza irregulars, such a wide array of individuals showed up to try and assist Jim Garrison or hinder him, depending on your point of view. Okay. And in my estimation, this guy with the John Birch Society was one of those people trying to hinder him. But anyway, you can say what you want about Mae Brussels showing up there, Mary Farrell showing up there. These are names that people would know. But all kinds of individuals showed up there trying to assist Garrison. He took on a lot of volunteers and really wound up making. Not only was the CIA making a mess of his investigation, but I think his irregular staff was also hindering him a great deal. At the same time. Okay. So this is very interesting, and actually Thornley's got connections and had meetings with a lot of these people over the years. Some of them post Garrison investigation, and some of them previous to, right?
Oh, indeed, yeah. It was a whole mix of people. You didn't mention Mort Saul was.
Oh, I did forget Mort. Yes, yeah, thank you.
Big time comedian. He's still at it. I'm in Central California, and I hear he does weekly get-togethers where he's still delivering his political monologues and doing well. But Mort Saul and William Turner, and you could just go down the list with the different irregulars. Yeah, and one of them, Harold Weisberg, who anybody's in JFK assassination research are quite familiar with, and it was Weisberg was really the main guy who came up with a lot of the theories related to Thornley, and really got into quite an adversarial relationship with Kerry Thornley during that period.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of that exactly? I mean, was it just Weisberg being who he was, not really taking him seriously, or do you think it had more to do with the fact that Thornley had went through that rough time period there, where not everything was so well grounded, let's just say, that was coming out of his mouth or his pen? I mean, what do you think that really had to do with?
Well, that was later when he was saying the crazy stuff. But if we take it from Thornley's perspective, and I have a lot of the letters and different writings and interviews by people. So, there's the Thornley, David Lifton perspective, and Thornley and Lifton were friends. And Lifton encouraged Thornley to provide information to the Garrison investigation during the period when it first launched, and Lifton thought that Thornley had information pertinent to John Rene Heindel, who was living in New Orleans, had been in the Marines, served with Oswald, and they also pointed at the name Heindel. That was close to Heidel, the Oswald alias. Ultimately, Thornley and Lifton thought that they were going to railroad Heindel, and Thornley didn't want any part of it. And I think I reproduced the letter in the book to Garrison. If not, it's posted one of the posts at the website. There's another website called historiadiscordia.com I would direct people to. But anyway, so it caused this falling out between Thornley and Garrison, and Weisberg got involved there at some point, and I think it was mainly Weisberg. Garrison took credit for it, but it was Weisberg who came up with the theory that Thornley's testimony before the Warren Commission and books were used to set up Oswald, and also the theory that Thornley was one of the Oswald doubles. Some suggested that it was Thornley who is in that infamous photo that ended up on Life magazine or whatever it was of Thornley or of Oswald holding the Mannlicher Carcano and the communist literature that was taken in his backyard in Texas. What were some of there were other accusations, and the main one that Thornley was seen with Oswald in September of 1963 there in New Orleans.
Right, and a lot of these things have, again, sort of fallen apart over the years. Like, for instance, although the backyard photographs are awfully odd, realistically, I've seen this done where somebody goes to the address at the right time of year before they rip down the steps, by the way, which, changes the position of the sun in the sky, and you can actually reproduce those shadows, which seem really incongruous with reality. But
yeah.
But it can be done. It can be done physically.
And of course, Oswald made that claim, or the claims attributed to him, that when he saw that photo, he says, that's not my photo. Somebody stuck my head on that.
Oh, yeah, during the time that he's being interrogated by the Dallas police. Of course, there's only these fragmentary notes from the main investigator, and, of course, the greatest set of notes from the postal inspector / FBI guy who actually did take full-scale notes. But other than that, no documentation for a lot of this stuff, mind you.
Well, that's part of the thing. I got into a lot of this material back in the day. You came across the Garrison stuff that a lot of people were repeating. You kind of took it as being truth. Hey, this was the New Orleans district attorney. I'm not saying Garrison was necessarily making this stuff up, but once again, he was getting a lot of information from a lot of different directions, and in my opinion, some of it he would just throw on the wall and see if it would stick.
Well, on balance, I mean, to be fair to Garrison, but not to deify him, okay? Because I'm not one of these guys who does that. I admire what he did, but not because I believe that he absolutely had the truth in his hands. I admire what he did because based on all the interference, some of it he caused himself, but some of it from outside, he actually did pretty well, considering the chaos that could have really come out of all that. And of course, it was unsuccessful, the attempted prosecution of Clay Shaw, and probably rightfully so. Shaw was certainly connected to the agency, and we've discovered more and more about that as time has gone on. But to say that he was, a main sort of player in the conspiracy that really executed the assassination seems a little bit far-flung, and I think it's part of the misdirection that occurred because of all of these different inputs coming from such diverse places that weren't necessarily grounded very well. So on the whole, I would say that Garrison did pretty well. I admire the fact that he was willing to fight with the feds. I admire the fact that he was willing to trudge on despite the resistance he received from seemingly all over the place. And admire him for that. But at the same time, I don't believe that he had the absolute truth in his hands either. And again, I do put part of the blame on him, but of course, with the CIA interfering with you and with you trying to take on volunteers that are fighting with each other, that are suspecting one another of things, that are stealing documents, that are creating weird things, what else are you going to do?
And then again, if you start poking the CIA, they're going to poke back.
Which they did, and now we have documentation for that.
Yeah.
Hello. It actually happened, yes. The CIA was screwing with the District Attorney of New Orleans Parish's investigation. That is a reality. But, again, it's one of those things, again, where I think you got to take it, from a fully developed perspective. Just like with Thornley, I think the same thing has to be done. And you agreed with that, for the most part, that you have to sort of sort through this stuff. And I'm sure this stuff has given you a headache over time, trying to sort through this. And and all. And I'm sorry, I kind of diverted away from what you were saying there. I apologize, but it's just I felt like that needed to be said because we brought up the Garrison investigation so many times.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that.
So anyway, um, we have about I would say we have about 25 minutes left. Okay. If you're good with it, I'm willing to open up phone lines if anybody wants to call in.
Oh,
If
yeah.
If not, because I'm very sure that if somebody is actually hanging on every word in this broadcast, they've got questions. Because I have a lot of them, but I don't want to get too deep into minutia with you because I could,
Yeah.
we could sit here and discuss, well, exactly at which point, do we see, because just the mention of the LSD being stashed at Atsugi and that whole interaction right there, if we just dial it back there, we could spend the next couple hours just discussing what really happened, because he's in proximity to all kinds of weird stuff there, and this is before he ever gets back to the States, and before he winds up again crossing over with Oswald. See, this is another weird thing. Without networking the way it exists now, this guy crosses over with Oswald a couple of interesting times, and at some point, you stop thinking that something is coincidence and it becomes intentional. Uh, you know, could
Well,
Thornley, could Thornley, in my estimation, here's a weird thing for me, is could Thornley have actually been used as a patsy for something at some point?
well,
Because
that's what Thornley suspected, that he was being set up to be a fallback patsy, going back to those discussions way back when in New Orleans where they're talking about assassinating a president. He later suspected maybe they recorded those conversations if it was E. Howard Hunt, and why did he always end up in the proximity of these different players in the Garrison and targeted, like meeting David Ferry at a party just briefly. The same with Clay Shaw. He met with Guy Bannister briefly, supposedly with Oswald in New Orleans, though he didn't recognize Oswald. Maybe it was an Oswald double. Who knows? But yeah, because of all of this, Thornley later suspected that those weren't chance encounters, that those people had been put in his path to be evidence to later be used against him in case they did need a fallback patsy if the Oswald setup had gone awry. That was one of Thornley's working theories.
Well, right. And, of course, I didn't give out the number. 718-717-8296 if you want to call in. Also, if you're on my Skype list, I'll drop you right in if you feel like Skyping on into the conversation. And you can ask Adam a question. Like I said, Thornley himself is extremely fascinating. you know, just as a character anyway.
Yeah.
Whether you believe everything he says or whether like I say, okay, here's where my judgment comes down on the guy, and I'm going to be brutally honest with you, is
Mm-hmm.
that I think that there is a percentage of what he says that is probably, not probably, let me stop qualifying. There's a percentage of what he says that is accurate, bottom line. Now, do I think that's the majority of what he says? No. No, I don't, and it's because of the nature of this stuff, A lot of times, these guys that are involved in stuff, and like I said before, it's not necessarily even because he's just making things up and continuing his, Discordianism philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you want to say, or he's just trying to gain fame for himself or something like. No, I don't think that. The possibility is, though, that he could have been damaged by some very real things that did happen. He was in close enough
Yeah.
proximity to the LSD projects. He was in close enough proximity to some rather nefarious characters. He was in close enough proximity to just some wild times that he could have gotten into all by himself, even voluntarily. Okay, so this guy could be just, in an odd place for the rest of his life, considering what he
Yeah.
came out of and what he came through, and that could color everything that has come from him ever after.
Yeah, and
The
very, very early on, like he was talking about E. Howard Hunt, pretty early on. He was also talking about mind control, and this was in the early 70s, that he had been implanted with some type of device. And not a lot of people were talking about these type of things in the early 70s. As we into the later 70s and 80s, more of these revelations or claims about MK Ultra victims started to come out. So yeah, what came first? Was Thornley just nuts, or did the MK Ultra or the manipulation drive him over the deep end?
Well, yeah, there's all that, and of course he is talking sort of ahead of his time about a bunch of things, and him being brought before the Warren Commission even is kind of reasonable, considering that he sort of had part of their narrative already in his hands before they did, which I think is a bunch of bull, and like let's fact check real quickly here, okay? Like the reality is that the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was a peripheral organization at the time. Although, if you check on what the CIA was doing about it, they had a program against it, which I find really fascinating. And Oswald didn't legitimately have a chapter, to the best I can find. So that's a whole weird thing going on.
Well, he had himself and J. Hidell, or whatever his name was. Yeah, it was just Oswald's organization.
Alec J. Hidell, which of course was his alias, that he had the ID in his pocket for. Although, he ends up with, an Alex Hidell delivered rifle at a post office box where Alec Hidell is not allowed to receive a gun. But that's a story for another day. Right? Himself and this fictitious character he's created. Even though, like I said, again, at the post office box it was received. I think Marina was on there, but but even his alias wasn't allowed to collect mail. Okay, moving on. It's a strange thing that goes on, right? I mean, from a literal standpoint, there was more guys in the cult of Discordianism than there were in Oswald's Fair Play for Cuba Committee chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Easily. I mean, because he turned around and paid guys to hand out flyers, even in the big episode that got him the $10 fine, where he's fighting with Berenguer and all that. I do forget. Did Thornley run across some of those guys like Berenguer? Carlos Berenguer. The guy who ends up.
Oh yeah. Well, once again, Garrison claimed he did, or one of the investigators claimed that Thornley's girlfriend was with Thornley when they met somebody who looked a lot like Bringauer, however you say his name. But once again, dig deep into a lot of the different Garrison files. A lot of these are memos. There's not a whole lot of witness statements, so it's just... you can't really confirm much, but yeah, he was Thornley at one time or another was connected with all kinds of people involved, or allegedly involved one way or another with that whole apparatus nexus there in New Orleans of spooks.
Well, right, and but that's a whole weird sort of nexus. And again, this guy is in proximity to all kinds of points of interest and characters of interest, and that is all provable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some of the things that emanate from that become, sort of we leave it to the judgment of the reader almost, because that's where you're at. You have his word.
Yeah.
And things like that, and I mean, it's an absolutely fascinating, and I'm gonna tell you guys that no matter how you wind up coming down on somebody like Kerry Thornley, that Adam is actually an engaging writer, and somebody that I do enjoy reading. So this is not one of those boring, badly written books either that just goes into constant minutia and drives you up a wall. It's actually an interesting read, and a lot of the stuff that I've seen Adam write over the years is really interesting. And again, you can find his stuff at adamgorightly.com, at Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, just anywhere books are sold. You can find a lot of your stuff. I find the Manson stuff really fascinating. I'm sorry I dragged you back into it.
Oh,
You know, they
comes with the territory.
you try to get out, but they pull you back in.
Exactly.
But I can't help it because I'm happy to see somebody else understands that that maybe there's a whole lot more to the reality of that than just the Bugliosi mythos, right? So
Have
I'm
you
happy
heard
to see
about
that.
the show coming out, and I think it starts in May, called Aquarius, with David Duchovny
Uh,
as a police investigator on the trail of Charles Manson.
oh yeah, I saw that and I went, oh no, because the whole deal with Tom Hanks and HBO and all that fell apart for his Reclaiming History thing. So I'm figuring
Yeah.
that he must be getting a consultant fee on that sucker, because that's got to be part of it. The whole, we're going to really ramp it up, and they're going to create composite characters and add to the mythology even more.
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw that and I shuddered, and I really hoped it was one of those things, because I saw when you see stuff before the production or before the announcement of placement on a program is actually made, and I said to myself, God, I hope that just doesn't make it, but it looks like it's gonna. And do you know anything about the production of that yet?
No, there's trailers out for it, and it's coming. The first episode's going to be on May 28th, so it'll be rolling.
Oh God! See, I try not to. I really try not to watch TV, man. I really do, and I may have to. I may have to watch it just to pick some things apart, because you can. I mean, you and I are both imagining exactly how outlandish this is going to be, right? I mean, if you want to make a statement about it, go ahead. But what do you think is going to happen?
I'm just intrigued by it. I've liked, some of the stuff Duchovny's done, but yeah, we'll see. It's on a major network too, so yeah. I'm not expecting much, but I'll tune in. I'll give it a chance,
But we'll take a look at it to see if it's truly the train wreck that we could possibly imagine, right? Yeah, I hate to admit it, but I think I'm going to have to do it too. May 28th. I'm sure I'll see plenty of the internet campaign is going to go out the week before to try and get people's attention. So I'm sure I'll be inundated with that stuff, because I'm signed in with people that the Charles Manson truth in the Charles Manson case people and all that stuff. So I'm sure they're going to be talking about it more. I know they probably mentioned it recently too, and it's just, I totally forgot about that, though. You brought it back to the front of my mind.
Can't kill Manson. He lives on and on.
No, and what did you think? Have you ever spoken to him?
No.
No?
I was afraid to. I had opportunities, but they didn't work out. I'm not too far from where he is housed at Corcoran.
Yeah, he's at Corcoran now. And the thing is, I mean, I got in on one of those phone calls. I never got a face-to-face with him. But,
yeah.
That was only because, there was the whole, he was angry, and you had to sort of get his approval to put out certain things. You probably know about this. And I don't want to go into too many details or implicate anyone else in this particular enterprise, but at one time I was doing, bootleg stuff, let's just say. That,
yeah.
Oh,
you probably know some of the same people I do. Yeah, and they were, not that long ago, 5-10 years ago. Manson, yeah, he was, he had a cell phone, and he was communicating with the outside world. It's like,
yeah,
okay.
I was well, then that there was like a New York contingent to that.
I don't know everybody involved. I talked to one of the fellas who's released some of his music.
Okay, well, the one in New York or the one on the other coast?
On the other coast, I believe.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. Then the guy that was talking to the same guy that I was involved with.
Yeah. I'll be damned if I can remember the name off the top of my head, but yeah.
No, because you know why? First of all, they went around in certain circles only using their first names for a while and everything else, because there were actually death threats and everything made against people that were
Oh, shit.
T-shirts and all that other stuff, and people were trying to hide where they were manufacturing things
Mm,
because
crazy.
they were really afraid of Manson's, peripheral followers who, were born 10 years and 15 years after the guy was in prison, you know.
Yeah, well, there's still some of them out there,
There
you
are
know.
still, yeah, that's the thing I was going to say is that to this day, there are people that are devoted to him as if he were a modern day prophet.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, I honestly blame Bugliosi and his ilk for this
Yep.
because he's the one who propagated the anti-hero, established image of Manson, and without that, he would just be another criminal who was involved in a conspiracy. You know,
Hmm.
that's it. But unfortunately, again, when you make up lies and you cover up things and you propagate certain psychological aspects to certain cases, and you create disinformation and you create information itself in the media because when something is made up whole cloth, I don't know whether to call it disinformation, misinformation, or simply information. It may be false, but it's still information of some sort. And sometimes they're blends of these things all together. And I know that sounds completely crazy, but, the more you dig into these rabbit holes, isn't that what you find?
Yes.
So that's the thing. And,
Yeah, that's the challenge of looking into the Manson story because there is a lot of mythology wrapped around this enigma, and Manson had he at times has added to the mythology himself.
well, right. But then again, just like many an incarcerated guy, what else do they have to do?
Exactly, yeah.
If you can't add to your own legend and you're a legendary criminal, well, what good are you?
Well, yeah, you want to have that in prison to have that cred, because I make the other prisoners think that somebody has your back.
Well, there you go, exactly, and it does help all the way around when you do stuff like that. Um, so I'll tell you what, we're down to like the last 12 minutes here, and I do want to, as I said before, and I've said a few times during this show, that if you go to adamgorightly.com and also, what did you say, the other website that you wanted to point people to?
HistoriaDiscordia.com.
HistoriaDiscordia.com. See, it was a bit of a mouthful, and I didn't want to screw it up. So, because I will trip over my own tongue during my own show. That's what I do sometimes. But
Yeah,
HistoriaDiscordia.com.
yeah,
And
that's where I'm doing most of my posting these days. Different posts concerning the Discordian archives, and some of it's related to this Caught in the Crossfire book. The things, material that weren't able to make it in the book, and every now and then I come across other little tidbits, so I like to share those with folks.
yeah, I mean, definitely more interesting stuff still emerging even after you finish the book, right?
That's the way it always goes. It never stops. God.
Well, you may end up having to do a reissue or some sort of a
Hmm.
or an addendum, as it were. And when I was categorizing, and somebody mentioned this in a Skype message, but when I was categorizing the monographs and things that both Adam and I were describing, these things were kind of hard to find. Number one, and they did run the gambit. I mean, really run the gambit between you know, I fell asleep last night and I had alien visitations in my dreams to stuff like The Bastard Bullet by Ray Marcus, which I think is still
Hmm.
one of the best works ever constructed, relating to a particular aspect of the JFK assassination. And Ray Marcus was a guy,
He
geez,
was another Dealey Plaza irregular.
he sure was, right. And also, but really a solid guy based on the technology he had in front of him and everything else at the time. And really, to me, nobody's actually been able to outdo the tracing of that wonderful magic bullet the actual exhibit itself and what happened to it and the journey of it, right? Ever after. I mean, my opinion, again, I think this guy did some great work. And that was the weird thing, is you could find, the crazy rantings of somebody who lived in a basement that probably didn't even have a house open anymore, to a guy who was doing solid research, actually providing you with photographs and sometimes just Xeroxed horrible, Rorschach-looking text, things, in their photographic evidence and things like that, along with some typewritten text, and boom, you paid $5. That was it. It ranged from that to some of the great works that actually stand up to this point in time, and it was kind of remarkable that was all independently created, by individuals who actually cared about something, whether it was literally the worship of Barbie dolls, and I kid you not, you can find fanzines somewhere about how Barbie dolls were messengers from God, to the discussion of angelic visitations, modern-day prophets, UFOs, the JFK assassination, RFK, MLK, the destruction of the Black Panthers, the FBI conspiracies, was J. Edgar Hoover really gay, the heavy metal underground, the people that like to dress up in different costumes and get together for group sex fanzines. I mean, every possible, imaginable, far-flung fringe thing you could imagine at the time was circulated in this way, ladies and gentlemen. So
the good old days, yeah, and it was quite a treat, to pay a visit to the post office box once a week, and who knows what you'd find. You're talking about you were a tape trader, and I was involved in that scene too. It was just a great network there to get a hold of a lot of that obscure material, and yeah, I became a connoisseur of different JFK monograms, from the good stuff that had some modicum of validity. What's his name? Ray Marcus, is that who you mentioned? To stuff like weird, obscure, off-the-wall stuff like there was a guy named George C. Thompson who, I forget what he titled the work, but I still have that in my collection. Hundreds of pages devoted to his theory that LBJ was the assassin in Dealey Plaza.
Yeah, there was that, all the way to the guy who I call him the man of a million diagrams, because he had so many different diagrams of Dealey Plaza. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but if you mentioned it, I'd go, yeah, that guy. He was one of these guys with 2 letters and then his last name. There was a bunch of those guys. They'd be RJ this or RT this or TS this. Never really giving their full names, because they would tell you on the on the first page that because of their great inside knowledge, they feared for their lives. So
of course,
you could only send them cash for their next piece of work. But I mean, all that going on, and of course during the tape trading time, this is when a guy like Bill Cooper emerged to hand out the Unmasked the Assassin and all. That was the late 80s. Did you get one of those too?
No, I saw later copies on YouTube, but I was clued into Bill Cooper way back when, so I was following his work when he emerged in the late 80s. Don't have a lot of time left here, but I used to have a knack for tuning into obscure radio programs. I seemed to had a knack into stumbling upon these, and one was this show that came out of Las Vegas, and I'm in California, so I had a GE Super Radio that I'd tune into called the Billy Goodman Happening, which when it first started, he kind of started getting into some stuff like, was Elvis Presley still alive and this or that, but he was based in Las Vegas during that whole period where Bill Cooper emerged in the Area 51 thing with Bob Lazar and John Lear, this whole collection of people who started claiming these different conspiracies, that there was a pact between the humans and aliens, and they had a secret underground base where they were doing all this experimentation, as well as, Bill Cooper glomming on to the theory that, it was the driver William Greer, who killed Kennedy using some shellfish toxin dart, and he had the film to prove it. And
that
yeah,
awful copy of the Zapruder film. Yeah, and we of course have lived through all this stuff, including a bomb being placed in the seat back of the limo and everything else. Jackie shot him. I love that one.
Yeah.
Jackie shot him.
Or there's even the theory that it was the Beatles who did a quadrangulation of fire, and they were the ones who took out JFK.
Well, they had to be brought in to soothe the American public, so of course they were involved.
That too, yeah, too.
Yeah, that's the other thing. And sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, a lot of this stuff, when you're initially exposed to it in the realm of the JFK assassination, I saw, that Cooper film, or at least variations of it, and if you look through it through that lens, the driver is turning back, and it looks like he's holding something up, so these things can really take off in culture at certain times, and that film certainly did for a period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a serious groundswell of individuals at that time that thought there's the solution.
Yeah.
And it's really rather unfortunate. But that's the thing, is you have to examine, and here's what I'm going to say to try and close things out, and I'll give you the final thoughts on this. And I want to thank everybody for tuning into the Ochelli Effect tonight. I think we did have an interesting conversation here with Adam Gorightly, which, again, a guy I want you to look up and check out his work and judge it for yourself. But I think the main thing is you need to judge all of these interesting characters for yourself, and I think that when you see these easily gotten to conclusions, you have to remember that unless you verify for yourself in the best way possible, you're just taking someone else's word for it. So the appeal to authority works that way too. So, Adam, is there any kind of final thoughts you want to throw on this tonight?
No, it was just a fun ride. Thanks for steering the ship, and it's good talking to you.
No, absolutely, and I would absolutely love to do this again with you, and there's a whole lot of stuff we didn't cover. I know I sort of, sawed off a few of those spots, but it was just for continuity, and I wanted to make sure we got like a good sort of panoramic view of how you operate, the fact that you are a serious guy. We can make some jokes, but that you weren't the joke. There are guys out there who are a joke at this, whether intentionally or not. But you're not one of them. You're actually somebody who's taken the time and understands that reality and convenient fiction are not necessarily the same thing, and you've got to sort these things out for yourself. And of course, you've done some of that work for people. Once again, the full title of your book.
Caught in the Crossfire, Kerry, Thornley, Lee Oswald, and the Garrison Investigation. Sometimes I need to think myself. I got these books with these long titles. It's like, what is the name of it? Yeah, but check it out. Available anywhere, just Amazon, or just type in Adam Gorightly. Kerry Thornley if you want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yep, that too. And, of course, I do ask you to check out his work on Manson, though. If you're going to run across him on Facebook or something, maybe don't pester him about it, because he's done that a while. But I had to touch on it, because it's good to see that somebody's thinking about that critically besides myself. So I'm glad. And like I said, we kind of come at it from slightly different angles, but still coming to the same conclusion. We're not being told the truth. Okay. Anyway, again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Ochelli Effect on UCY.tv, and if you're catching this further on down the line, you can find the archives, you can find the donate button, you can find the YouTube links to this show and others shortly after airtime by going to ucy.tv/TOE. Also, you can find us on Facebook. There's a discussion group for the radio show. There's an entity page for the radio show. You can find Adam Gorightly on Facebook, too. I don't know if he's going to accept your friend request, but that's up to him. You can go look at his page, though, and he's got some very interesting information about some of the stuff he's written, and some other things on there too. So, if you're into the social media thing, do you have a Twitter account and stuff, or what?
I do Twitter as well. Now, I'll accept friends on Facebook unless it's somebody that looks sketchy, that doesn't have any other friends and some odd name and one of those type deals.
Or has the name of somebody that died 10 years ago. That's another interesting phenomenon out there. I think L. Fletcher Prouty tried to friend me the other day, and I think he's been dead for about a decade and a half, but might be my imagination. Yeah,
I'm friends with Lee Oswald and a few other ghosts, but
yeah, well, we take some of them, but I can't have a cadre of dead people.